Hi, welcome to today's podcast. I'm in a different place in the house because I wanted to try to get in front of a hard surface where I might be able to record and show you some shuffling techniques. So basically, shuffling techniques, there are a whole bunch of them out there, and I'm not an expert shuffler. There are some amazing card handlers in this world, and I'm not one of them. But this is just to give you some ideas and hopefully to help you feel more at ease with your own shuffling and your process of drawing for cards. So we're starting, I've pulled a couple different decks here for us to look at today. And this first one that I've got, I'm going to move the camera a little so hopefully you can see the surface that I'm working on as well. This first deck here that we're looking at is the size I consider it a standard size for a tarot deck. It's the universal weight deck, and it's a little bit larger than your average playing card size. So we're starting by looking at these two because these are kind of the most common size cards that you see. And the card size deck, the playing card side, I'll start with those first for demonstrating technique. So the first technique I'll show you is basically the same thing we all learn when we're kids. I've learned it as the rifle shuffle because the sound is like it's rifling. And I'll try to get it back here so you can see it in the camera. And then the bridge to bring them back together. So in this technique, you split the deck, and I'm using my fingers, my forefingers and thumbs to create, it's hard to do and slow down, to create a bend and a bow so I have the tension in the deck so that they will rifle together. And of course you can bridge them back. Again, I'm going to adjust the camera. Today is a tricky one, trying to get a flat surface capture. So with that being the case, I don't recommend this particular one for a lot of your tarot card reading. And the reason for that is because it does put so much pressure on your deck. First, you're bending them in one direction. That warps your cards. You can see they have a little bit of a warp, even though this is a very plasticized deck. It came from Vegas. It's Tropicana, old one. And then you bridge them. Of course, that provides the opposite bend in the cards. And then the cards themselves, just from a little bit of handling, if I show them sitting flat, you can see how they've got a bend. They've got some damage already permanently in them. And that's just from the ongoing use and abuse. And so the cards themselves can get a little bit more bent and nicked up. It's just not a technique that a lot of tarot readers will want to use. Some do and some don't. It's entirely your personal preference. And like everything on Destination Unknown, I present the information for you to critically examine and determine what's best for your path. So for me and my path, I started being told by experts, don't rifle your deck. It's bad because it bends up your cards and it messes up the edges really fast. They'll peel faster if they're not protected, and it's bad. And so sometimes, even to this day, if you're holding another person's deck, sometimes people will ask you, is it okay if I shuffle or if I rifle shuffle? Or they'll ask permission because they do know that some styles of shuffling can cause damage to your tools. But the shuffling technique that I use most is called lacing the deck. And lacing is where you have the entire deck in your dominant hand, for me, my right hand. And I'm kind of holding it between my fingers in this shape. So I'm using my middle two and my thumb to hold on to. These guys are just hanging out. And I begin to drop, and at the same time that I have gravity dropping them into my opposite hand, I'm using my thumb to provide a little bit of pressure and pull them into that hand as well. So that when it speeds up, and it's a little bit messy today, if anything, this one in particular, you'll see right away, I'm not bending the cards. Now, jumpers will happen, and we're going to do a whole nother discussion about jumper cards. Jumpers are the ones that present themselves just like that. They seem to flip out of the deck while you're shuffling. I have it happen a lot more with lacing than with rifling. That has a lot to do with me and my card handling skills as well. So when is it a jumper and when is it not? We'll talk about that. But for now, just talking about styles, you can see me, I'm doing a little bit of pressing on my deck to try to help flatten them out, keep them nice and flat. And so, yeah, most often if I'm shuffling when I'm talking to a client and I'm getting ready for a reading, I will shuffle and every now and then scissor in, kind of take a few and saw them in. If I do the whole deck, it would look like that, where I'm sawing them into the center of the deck. That causes a lot of, again, friction on the edges of your deck, which can cause long-term damage. So lacing is a style of being able to shuffle where you're not going to do nearly as much damage. Yes, you're going to be doing a lot of sliding of the images, so there would be a more scratching on the surface of the cards, those surface scratches. But if you have, most decks are treated with some plastic coating, and that really helps protect them. Some of them are very plasticized, and different size decks are going to lend themselves, both the consistency of the deck, what it was made with, and the size of it may change how you feel about shuffling with that deck. So this particular deck, the Answer deck, it's so tiny. Even if you look at it side-by-side comparison with an average playing card size deck, you'll see right away it's so much smaller. And it's also so much wider. It has more cards than the 56 that you can see here. In fact, I haven't counted. It's been a whole long time. I've had it for a long time. I don't remember how many cards are in the Answer deck, but it's pretty close to the 78 or maybe even more that you see in a tarot deck. And look how tiny it is side by side with tarot, a standard tarot. So this guy, when I'm shuffling it, I mean, it's so plasticized that I probably can't damage it if I rifle shuffle. But watch this. This is so weird. It's such a thick deck, and it's made of such a sturdy plastic that I am pushing with all my might to try to crease these cards. They don't want to crease. They don't bend. They don't have as much give as we have in these cards, where if I press them like that, there's a lot of bowing in the cards. These cards are just bomb-proof. That's also kind of why you can see they're still so pristine and white. I've had them for a long time and used them plenty, and yet compared to this is a replacement deck even in my collection for my universal weight, and you can see they're still much dingier and dirtier along the edges. And so why? That's because this one has that heavy plasticized coating on top, which is a great protectant, but it definitely makes them slipperier when you're handling them, and they're tiny. So you put those things together and they can be kind of weird and hard to shuffle. So again, I default to my style is to lace. So I will lace the deck. And again, even if larger chunks, so instead of getting like individual cards to lace, you can kind of see like chunks of cards coming in. That's okay. That's all right. You can just keep playing with them. But one of the things that, for me, lacing breaks down on are the large decks. Now this is a Thoth size deck. That's the Thoth deck. It's the larger size. So again, side-by-side comparison with what we might call a standard tarot deck. You can see it's much larger, about the same card width, so that the thickness of the card cut is about the same. We know it's going to be 78 cards no matter how thick or thin the cardstock is. But this one is so large. It's so large. I have large hands, and if I try to lace them first, my hands are expanded about as far as my digits can go just to try to hold them in one hand and then lace them into the next. And so for me, this is a really awkward. Also, the fact that I have not used these cards as much, this deck as much, they are slipperier and they act up more. They're just they slide a lot more against each other. You'll notice that the more you handle a deck, and I'm going back to my universal weights because this for me is kind of a deck I go to a lot. This one doesn't slide as much in my hands, and they're obviously it's a size I feel more comfortable with, but also the way the cards friction against each other is different deck to deck, and that's because of that plasticized layer that we're talking about, as well as card handling. So the more that I've handled a deck, like we were saying, I've created these microscopic scratches over the surface of the deck as they're sliding against each other, and that gives an amount of friction to it. And for me, this deck is large, it's slipperier because it doesn't have that friction to it because I haven't used them as much. And so it's a lot more unwieldy for me. So these larger size decks, and I even have some larger specialty decks, maybe we'll drag those out for another day. Sometimes what you want to do with these really large ones, it's up to you, is you make soup with them. I've heard it called soup, where you just get them down and kind of like when you play Go Fish and you're a kid and you just put the whole pile in front of you and just keep mixing up. I'll try to tilt the camera so you can see. I'm just mixing up the cards in front of me. And then I'll gather them all back together into a pile once I feel like whatever, I feel like I'm ready to. And so this particular process obviously is going to shuffle your cards, but let's face it, it's not a very elegant way to shuffle your cards. And if I'm sitting in front of a client, especially, I just think it's very clumsy as far as how to handle your deck, especially in front of someone who expects you to have a certain amount of control over your cards and your reading. So if you go in and you start playing Go Fish with them, might raise an eyebrow, might not, just depends. But in any case, so these larger decks like this, there are a couple different shuffling techniques that you might want to use for them as well. The larger the deck, the more, oh God, I'm going to do this for just a second. So if I cut this deck in half as if I was rifling them, it's really big, so holy cow, if I really tried, I could bend it really, really hard. I'm so sorry. But yeah, so that's kind of the, like the bigger the deck, the less you want to rifle them because they will bend so easily. So that's something to be aware of. The last thing I wanted to talk about with card handling as far as shuffling is also the idea of reversals. So right now when I'm lacing a deck, if this is my standard deck and I'm getting ready to sit down for a reading, Page of Wands, not only do I want to shuffle the order of the cards effectively, if you read with reversals, then you also need to think about shuffling the reversals of the cards as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, each time I'm sliding these over, they stay in the same position, whether that be upright or upside down. They don't change positions each time that they're going through because I'm just kind of laying them into my hand, picking them up, laying them in. So what can I do to shuffle them that way? This bothered me. I went through different shuffling techniques as I was learning tarot, and I got really hung up about certain ideas. I wanted to do it right. I was always obsessed with doing it right. And so finally you realize, like so many things in life, there's no right way. There's the right way for you, and that answer might change given what you're working with in any given moment. So you have to find what's right for you, and truly. And that's a process. It can be trial and error. So for myself, I used to rifle shuffle because that's all I knew how to do. I later taught myself to lace. I have a friend who used to say he would love to just sit and shuffle cards while he watched TV. I've done that before. It's really relaxing if you just kind of get your cards and start handling them and don't think about them so much. Just play with them instead of being so precious about them. It's a good bonding experience. It makes them feel much more personal to you instead of these pristine, perfect things that you never touch or hold. And it also begins to create that friction like we were talking about. A good, well-used set of cards, it will handle differently from the beginning of when you buy that deck to a couple years later if you've been reading with it regularly. So, being the case, reversals. So here I am and I'm lacing side to side, but I got really hung up about the fact that now that I could lace, I wasn't necessarily getting my reversals to shuffle themselves. So I created a technique, and I don't know if anyone else out there does this. This is my technique. You're welcome to take it. I don't pretend to be precious about it. I put the deck itself, whichever deck I'm working with, I put it between my two palms. And I'll put my palms facing opposite directions, the fingers, and then I spin the deck, right? And then I'll just sit there and I'll give them a turn and a turn on the countertop until they come together again in my hands. So again, I'll lace the deck, whoop, give it a quick lace, 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 and then I will spin the deck, put it down, give it a turn until I just keep fanning it in the same direction until they've all settled back down again. And you can do that until you're done. What is done, Alyssa? How do I know when I'm done? was another shuffling question that I gave myself. I really tied myself in knots because every time I shuffled, I was changing the answer. So what if the correct answer to my question was one shuffle ago, but I didn't stop shuffling, so I got the wrong answer? I got really hung up with these concepts when I was learning my reading at certain points. And so that's why I address them for anyone else out there who might also be struggling with these same ideas. It happens. So for myself, I used to draw off the top. So we're talking about shuffling and we talked about spinning the cards, but now I'm going to talk for just a second about dealing the cards. And this is also, again, personal choice. I would rifle shuffle and then I would flip deal. So what I mean by that is I would take the card off the top of the deck. I'll try to tilt so you can see. And then as I laid it down, I would flip it to lay it down. So it would turn once more, as far as whether or not it was a reversal. Now, what that does is, of course, it takes the card from being in one position and reverses it. So what if that was screwing it up? I got myself all hung up about this. Like, what if flipping it was wrong? What if I was undoing the reversal every time I flipped it because I didn't know if I should flip it? Oh my gosh, you can tie yourself in knots, and I did quite frequently. So how I chose to resolve my own shuffling dilemma, this was me. This is not gospel. This is just how I chose to deal with it as a reader myself, is that I will shuffle the cards until I feel like I'm done shuffling them. And that's usually just because they begin to feel like they're in a different order. They've got that feeling like all the cards are a little bit different even when you've gathered them together. And then I split the deck. So I don't deal off the top, and I don't deal off the side. So if I flip, I'm flipping the reversal. If I turn, I'm not turning the reversal as they come off the top of the deck. But then I got really hung up about the top of the deck. Like, what if the top of the deck was wrong? And like I said, it was better 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 shuffles ago. And now I'm doing the wrong reading because I didn't stop. So this is how I resolved it for myself. I now choose, when I'm done shuffling and spinning and doing all of that, I split the deck and then lay it down as I'm looking at it. So if I'm done shuffling, spin, and I'm ready to draw my middle card, I just simply open the deck like it's a book. The way I see the card is the way it goes down. That was my resolution to this dilemma. That doesn't mean that it's the right or the wrong way. It's only right or wrong if it feels right or wrong to you. When I finally landed on this style of shuffling and dealing my cards, I felt like I'd put to rest this big, huge existential drama I was having with my spreads and my layouts and my cards and how I pick my cards and all of that. So I wanted to do this today on the chance that if you too are finding yourself really hung up about cards, whether or not you're shuffling them right, how many times should I shuffle, when should I stop, is there a magic number that I should shuffle 7 times and then split the deck? No. There's no magic, there's no magic, there's no nothing, there are no answers that are right or wrong. There's simply what's going to do more or less damage to your deck. There's what kind of deck you have, as far as what it's made of and what size it is. There's whether or not it's a rare deck. If this was something that was extremely rare, I might shuffle it very differently than any of the techniques that I've shown today. And then it just comes down to personal preference. What do you finally land on that makes you feel comfortable? I had to get comfortable with the answer that I provided myself by lacing and spinning and then splitting the deck to pick my cards. And so each time I pick, that's my method. Again, not the right or the wrong way. It's just simply the way I do it, but it's worth talking about. It's something that not everyone gets a chance to talk about as a beginning reader. So I hope this has helped you today, and have fun with your decks. Sit down, shuffle them while you're watching TV, play with them. Have a lot of fun with them. They're your tools, and it feels good to work with them. The more you work with them, the more familiar they feel to you. And like any tool, once we become more familiar with it, we do a better job using it. So, okay, thanks for joining me today. Take care. We'll talk soon.